I'm so excited to introduce you to the best website designers out there. We have a brand new partnership with Session Sites. It is where good therapy meets brilliant design, and they get your website switched over or built in less than 2 weeks. They fine tune your messaging, use science backed user experience methodology, and work exclusively with mental health professionals. In fact, new clients right now are going to get 3 free therapy marketing strategy calls with their creative director of Session Sites if you book today. You're not going to want to miss this. Head on over to sessionsites.com/Joe. Again, that's sessionsites.com/Joe. Get the website of your dreams today. Sessionsites.com/Joe. This is the Practice of the Practice podcast with Joe Sanok, session number 1209. I'm Joe Sanok, your host, and welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast, where we help you build a thriving private practice that you absolutely love. I am so excited to have Stephen C. Hayes with me. Stephen is a Nevada Foundation professor of psychology emeritus at the University of Nevada and president of the Institute for Better Health, a 45-year-old charitable organization that promotes quality in mental and behavioral health services. He's authored 48 books, including Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life, which reached number 20 on Amazon's bestseller list, and A Liberated Mind, which explains why psychological flexibility helps us navigate the world. Methods he has developed are distributed worldwide by the World Health Organization and other major agencies, and he's among the top 5 most cited clinical psychologists in the world. Stephen, welcome to the Practice to Practice podcast.
I'm super happy to be here with you, Joe.
Yeah, with a bio like that, I'm like, what are you doing here? Holy cow, I'm lucky to be around you. That's amazing.
Yeah, well, I listened to all those books and stuff, and I think, Steve, get a life.
Well, it's great, when there have been people on the show that dig super deep into one area. And before we kind of get into our topic, as you reflect on your career, are there any through lines or threads that just keep pulling you back into this work that you can identify?
Yeah, it is. I mean, that comes from my family of origin, but I really have been interested from the beginning about how do you alleviate pain and promote prosperity. And I wanted that to really have that humanistic feel of the kind of, Abraham Maslow and the early humanistic approaches, but the kind of precision that I saw in behavioral psychology. And so I've spent my life trying to figure out how to be of use in drilling down to the smallest set of things that do the most good for the most people in the most areas. And really went slow and running out and saying, here's the solution, a lot more work on, what are the underlying processes? And when we finally stepped forward, it became, the overnight sensation that took 20 years to produce. And it's now around the world, more than 1,000 randomized trials in the work that I do. But what really motivates me is how do we reach inside the human beings in front of us and understand them in a way that we know how to uplift them. And if we spend our time doing that, we've been doing some good on the planet.
Yeah. I know early in, careers, lots of times you're just taking in information and seeing what kind of resonates, what you like, what you don't like. Were there early mindsets that either you saw that you thought, I don't know about that maybe you thought, I want to challenge that, or early mindsets or authors or psychologists that you thought, I really resonate with what they're teaching? Any that stand out from the kind of help direct this path for you?
Yeah, on the standout, I mentioned one, Maslow, and others. I was uplifted by the Skinnerian vision, from rats to Walden 2. I was more on the Walden 2 side as an old hippie. But in terms of walking away from it, I didn't like the way that psychology comes up with little micro theories, one after another, and it never seems to land and doing any good. It just gets people grants and, gets some promotions. And then over here are the practitioners doing the real work, and they're being told you better be evidence-based, but it's not giving people what they need. And so early on, I started looking at things like single case designs and how can we use the practice environment as a way not just to apply research information, but generate research information. And so that's been a theme that runs through, and I think it runs through some of the best of our psychology, but it also is in the heads and hearts and hands of the practitioners who are trying to do the best they can with the person right in front of them. And, I want to figure out a way to get the scientists on the same page.
Love that. Now, if you think about kind of processes of change and ones that matter, by even titling it, things like change that matters, it implies that there's also change that doesn't matter. When you think about how the field of psychology, and particularly practitioners, tend to enter into sessions, what would you say are things that they're doing that don't matter maybe as much as they think? And what are things that they could be doing that could matter a lot more?
Yeah, and it's not just that it doesn't matter, sometimes it's actually actively harmful. And
Mm.
I think the worst single thing that we've done is we've taught the entire world to think in terms of normative categories, and we've sort of demanded even to get reimbursed for the work you do to find the normative category that fits this person. And it's a clown suit. It's like this little cage you shove human beings into. Good clinicians learn a way to sort of game the system. They will fill out the dang forms and so forth, but they don't really take it seriously. But the part about that is that now we have a field that's kind of fighting itself and can't get on the same page, as I was saying earlier. So, uh, processes of change is a real shift in focus. Instead of normative categories, instead of which symptoms and signs of some latent disease. Look, human suffering is not a disease. Diseases can cause suffering, yes, but 50 years of trying to find them in our DSM and ICD, and there's not one success, not one syndrome has turned into a disease. The last one was general paresis, and I hope nobody has untreated syphilis cases on their caseload. And if you do, please refer them quickly to somebody who can give them the antibiotics that will prevent the progression of that disease. Well, so what are we going to do about a field that is trying to get better and better? And science is one of the best ways to do that, and yet is focused on the wrong things. And I think what we need to do is get the scientists to line up with what practitioners have been doing without much aid, which is what do you notice lifts this person up and what do you notice that pushes this person down? And all I mean by process of change are the things that you can do or that occur in your body and in your cultural and social groups, but especially the things you do in all these areas of emotion and cognition and attention and sense of self and motivation and overt behavior. What are the ones that lift you up? What are the ones that push you down? One particular person at a time. There's no one size fits all. It's
Mm.
just that is a falsehood. Anything that you go into a session with all your theories and the rest, if you think it applies to everyone, let me have a few minutes with you to show you how it doesn't. Because when we've started looking one at a time, all of our theories are wrong. And a good clinician has the flexibility to seek out what's true and helpful for this person. And that's where we need to go as a field. And processes of change is the opening agenda. Let's focus on that, learn how to do it, and get, as I say, that partnership that we need between the scientists and the practitioners.
Yeah, I know early in my career, it was really helpful to have just some of those, maybe what were called best practices or evidence-based things that it felt like after, a couple years of grad school, I didn't feel competent and ready to be in a session that I had enough life experience to really be able to, join a client in the way that I wanted. So I relied heavily on trainings and learning, whether it's ACT or CBT or, motivational interviewing or, the Gottman approach to couples therapy. Now, how would you, because obviously you're not saying like those trainings are bunk, just show up and wing it. How do you see trainings like, I think about the Gottmans, they've got a pretty clear standardized way of treating couples. Um, how does that fit in? How does a good training fit into this modality of also saying, let's look at these individuals one session at a time?
Yeah, I think it's going to take a shift, and I've been involved, and I know the Gottmans, and I know all the people who've created the various things that you're talking about. And of course, ACT is now pretty well known. Some people know about my specific work, but I don't really care about ACT qua ACT. What I care about are the processes that it targets, psychological flexibility, and how to let them expand as with new information, which we've been doing dramatically quickly. The difference when you focus, let's say, if you had kind of a how-to and here's the protocol and here are the steps versus here are the underlying processes we're trying to move with those steps, here's how to read them, here's how to orient towards them, here's how to target them, and here's how to know that you're making a change that is creating an overall sort of dynamical system that is now lifting the person's life up. That's a big shift. It's implicit in the best psychologies. And, people who say, we don't really care about theory and stuff. No, I look at what clinicians have, and their principles and concepts that are drawn. It isn't just, you get tired. You mentioned it. I do too. I mean, who wants to walk through a protocol one after another after another? I mean, oh my goodness, you want
Right.
to engage in self-injury after a few years of that. And instead, I think we really need to say, what are these techniques for? And when they work, what do they move? And how can I read them quickly? The processes of change are the first thing that shows up when you're making progress. It isn't the outcomes. Sometimes when you take a healthy step forward, the outcomes get worse. I'll give you an example. You look at, let's say, classic CBT for depression. There's a bump that happens early on around session 2 or 3 or 4, which is in the classic sequence where you just begin to start helping people open the door to what thoughts they're having and looking at them, where people get dysregulated and they get worse. On depression scores, they get worse. And they're the ones who are most likely to have great follow-up outcomes. So if you don't know that, or you don't know a principle like extinction will lead to extinction bursts. So if you've been feeding it as a parent, the little junior is really not crying because they're in pain, but crying because they're trying to manipulate you, and you step back from that, you're going to get more screaming, more crying. If you don't know that, you say, it didn't work. It didn't work. No, that's the indication it is working.
Yeah, I remember my Psych 360 lab with Dr. Jack Michaels at Western Michigan University. Very behavioral.
Oh my gosh, I know Jack. Well, the late Jack Michaels. Know him well. Sweet, sweet man.
Yeah, and it's like, I remember, we trained these rats to do all these things. And then finally, and I would have been 20 at the time. And then we have to extinguish that behavior of hitting the lever. And we had to count how many times this rat hit the lever, and you don't reinforce it at all. It was like 400, 500 times when the original amount was, I don't know, 5 to 10 times. And just, I have taken that through my career in working, especially with, traumatized teenagers and families around child behavior. Exactly what you're saying, that if you don't understand, you're going to see a massive bonk up to see, does this old behavior work still or not? Does screaming at my mom work? Well, let me scream more. Let me scream louder. Let me scream more frequently. And it's like, that's a good sign that something's happening. And you're exactly right. If you don't understand those basic principles, then it's going to be one of those things that you're like, this modality is just not working.
Yeah, and I gravitated. We have a shared history then, my friend, because I gravitated towards that work, but I became frustrated with the fact that most of those principles at the time, we're going back 40 years, 30 years, were developed with non-human animals. And that's fine. That's great.
Yeah.
And we have that evolutionary legacy, and your brain is doing things in microseconds that require no verbal awareness and all the rest. And we're part of the animal kingdom. But what you and I are doing right now is not what the bird is doing outside the window. What's going to be going on in 10 years from now is going to be different. I mean, look at what's happened over the last 20. Look at just what we're doing right now technologically. I don't know how far away you are, but you're next door and we're having a real live conversation that's going to be spreading around the world. Yeah, that's the kind of creatures we are. And so inside the ACT work, we spent a lot of time trying to drill down, understand those, and then link them up to things like emotion, cognition, and memory, attentive self, motivation. So, but they were onto something really important, those early behavior therapy, behavior modification kinds of things from which we built evidence-based therapies. We started there, which was have principles, understand how to bring them into the person's world, and then put them together into techniques that can be validated one person at a time, single case designs, and then scaled to general knowledge. Well, for people listening to me, what that means, I think, now is look for evidence that the techniques and methods you're learning work. That's only fair. Don't want to be putting things into people's lives that don't have decent evidence for outcome. But also look for evidence that tells you what are the processes you're changing and how do they combine as a whole set, because there's nothing you can name that's always good for everybody, or even some of the harmful ones are good sometimes for some things. I could go some examples of that. Learn how to read those processes, to actually see them in session or measure them. Learn how to orient towards them when you then realize this is what would be most important for this person. Learn how to actually change them with all those methods and protocols and with your own clinical creativity. And then learn how to read whether or not you're making real progress before the long-term outcomes happen. And if you can do that, you can let your clients be your best teachers. And good clinicians do that. Poor clinicians don't. It's not a matter of the amount of hours in the chair. You know, those horrible evidence that the time doing the work doesn't make you more competent. It makes you more confident. And you don't want to have confident incompetence. So if you, as a clinician, really want to be competent, learn how to read, orient, target, and change the processes that are most important for this person. And our theories that are out there in our evidence-based therapy is a good start, but we can do better. We can learn a lot. And frankly, the clinicians are the front line of knowledge information generation, not just knowledge use, in the AI-driven world that's coming, in my opinion.
Mm. Listen, I didn't take insurance in my counseling practice because I had no idea how to handle it. The process of accepting insurance outside of a group practice can be tough, but most people looking for mental health care want to use their benefits to pay for sessions. If you're like me and you feel a little scared about taking insurance, or you just want to make it easier on yourself, and you're interested in seeing clients through insurance, Alma can help. They make it easy to get credentialed with major insurance plans at enhanced reimbursement rates. They also handle all the paperwork, from eligibility checks to claim submission and guaranteed payment within 2 weeks. Plus, when you join Alma, you'll get access to time-saving tools for intake, scheduling, treatment plans, progress notes, and more in their included platform. It's going to make it so much easier for your team, so you can spend less time on administrative work and more time offering great care to your clients. Visit helloalma.com/Joe. That's helloalma.com/Joe to get started. You know, the analogy that comes to mind for me, and I would love for you to poke holes in this if this isn't what you're saying, is around cooking. You know, when you first start cooking, having a recipe, understanding how to make a good roux to thicken the sauce, or understanding some of the basics of, cooking meat or vegetables or things like that, like what flavors go together, how do you add an acid to it, or some salt or some fat. Like those are things that you usually learn through recipes early on. Um, but then there comes a time when you're cooking something, you realize, oh shoot, I don't have Castle Voltrona olives, but I have capers. That probably will work based on what I know about kind of olives and things that are pickled or things like that. In therapy, like, would you say that it's kind of similar, where there are some of those kind of basic techniques you got to learn early in your career, and then we are kind of more moving from the science of therapy to the art of therapy?
Well, I think you can do a science of art. And just like and cooking is a great metaphor, I think we've come up with recipes that are way too complicated. I mean, just take the DSM. There's almost 12 million combinations of signs and symptoms. If you include specifiers, it's 161 trillion combinations. No, oh, please, really? I mean, you have things PTSD with more than 250,000 different ways to have PTSD. Yes, there's a source, there's a core of suffering there, and it's okay to have a word for it. But please, let's take this gigantic room full of drawers with recipes in them and distill it down to the principles. Now, you can do it artfully and intuitively. You get a felt sense, like a good artist does, a good musician, a good painter, etc. But I think you can also need help, because when you're in the flow, you don't. When you're in the flow clinically, you're just moving right along. But when you can get a science of how that works, that simplifies instead of making it more complex. Then you can use that as an aid precisely when you're not in the flow. And I can give you an example from ACT. I can say a sentence that summarizes every single study that's ever been done in the history of the world that had a proper mediational analysis, which is the geek word for how you figure out what the processes of change are in our traditional randomized trials. I can give that to you in a pretty short sentence. You want it?
Yeah, sure do.
All right. Here's everything we know in a long sentence. You want to help lift up your clients? Learn how to help them become more open, aware, and actively engaged in a meaningful life while extending that knowledge to the relationships in their body. Drop a pin. That accounts for 98% of everything that we know about how change happens in those gazillion randomized trials that have been done, and focusing only on the ones where they properly statistically identified how change happened, not just that it happened. And I can show you the meta-analysis that we published where we looked at literally every randomized trial that had that kind of analysis ever done in the history of the world. And so now I got to define what open, aware, and actively engaged means. And we need to pile in as a large community to help give nuance to it. By open, I mean cognitively and emotionally open, allowing yourself to think and feel and to learn from that and carry it forward instead of being entangled in it. By aware, I mean finding this part of you that is this deeper, more spiritual sense of self and allocate your attention in a flexible, fluid, and voluntary way. By actively
Mm.
engaged, I mean know what your deepest values are, the qualities of being and doing you want to put into the world, and be able to orient your life around that and create habits so that you're being more mindful and caring even when you're not watching. And then extending that to your social relationships and taking care of your body. Well, that's not so hard. You could write it down in memory. And with a little bit of help, you can read those processes, you can orient towards them, you can target them, and you can change them. You can see how they fit together. And we're developing statistical tools that you don't have to know the geek stat. We have apps and things that are coming or here to help do that. I have COIs on that, but if you want me to mention it or put it in the notes, I will, so people can explore it. And when you do that, now you have an aid from the science saying, hey, you know what? This person here, they're pretty clear about their values, but man, when they step forward and they get in an area that's emotionally difficult, I don't know what's going on. Is it trauma history or whatever? Everything gets bound up and rigid. You're going to have to go in. There's some source of pain there that's echoing in, probably not even person aware of it yet. What is that? That's the kind of aid and help that we need, not does this person have this disorder or that disorder, when the book itself, the DSM says, don't use this to pick treatment. Do people know that? Read the beginning of the book. It says,
Yeah, every insurance company like defines what treatment you do based on the diagnosis.
yeah, but the book says it's not been proven to help outcomes, and it doesn't tell you which treatment to pick. Oh, thanks a lot. Well, then what is it freaking for? And at its worst, we put it into the kitchen table conversations around the world, and people think once you have a diagnosis, it's something you have. You probably need medications for it. 1 out of 4 women in North America were on antidepressants last year. Are you out of your mind? Maybe 1 out of 25. Okay. But they have long-term side effects, some of which are lifelong if you do high dose long term. We're just, it's crazy what we've done inside this normative category, shoving people into boxes, and clinicians mostly hate it, but they're told they have to. And as you say, the insurers, not to manage care, it's to manage cost. Let's be honest. They're just trying to avoid paying. And it's, the people who are suffering. So I think we can do right now something really important for clinicians, and I hope that sentence I gave you is interesting to you. And if it is, you can explore it and see how it'll fit Godman's work. It'll fit emotion-focused therapy. It'll fit schema. And yeah, it'll fit ACT too, because we're digging down to the principles that are underneath those gigantic drawers full of recipes that we intuitively then get a feel for when we're doing our cooking, if that metaphor works. I think
Hmm.
it does. But now with a little bit of aid from a science of cooking, a science of how good practice actually lifts people up.
Will you say that sentence again? I want to dig into parts of it, and I didn't write it down, but I want to hear that sentence again.
Help your clients learn to be more open, aware, and actively engaged in a meaningful life, extending that to their relationships and taking care of their body. Drop a
Mm.
pin. That's it. Maybe other things can be added. And in each of these categories, we're adding things as we go. And so I'm not saying act uber alles here. Please do not read this as me trying to say, oh, I've been right for 40 years. You need to do my stuff. No, there's cool stuff in act. Absolutely. But what I've always cared about, what I care about in this conversation is empowering clinicians to see the processes that will most make a difference. And inside that sentence are basically all of them that we know that are empirically validated as I sit here.
Yeah. How can especially early stage clinicians enact that sentence? Like, I think sometimes it's hard to know, like, how do I do that? What would you encourage them? How can they think like Stephen when they're in the sessions?
Well, I think uh, looking at the process oriented evidence based therapies, and then as you explore different therapies, look for the underlying processes, but be especially interested in how you can read it in the room. Or if there's questions you can ask, not so much long questionnaires, but just questions you can literally ask with your mouth or maybe with written work that orient you towards those processes and where the person is. If somebody says something like, oh, anger, we never did anger in my family. A little bell should ring off, and then don't leap on it, like a cat on a mouse. You got to see how it fits into the overall system. But this means somebody has had training and probably avoiding an important emotion, or they've never seen a good example of how to be angry and use that in a way that's healthy in their life. They may have lived with suppressors or exploders, probably. That's probably why they said that. And and when that emotion among many shows up that is important to the person, such as when they're being invalidated, when they're being abused, when they're not being listened to, when they're being dismissed, anger is a perfectly reasonable and helpful emotion if you know what to do with it. So you're going to have to help the client, probably need to look at all the other things fitting together, learn to open up, to show up, to orient to what's so important, and then connect with, well, what do I really want to have happen here? That's values. What do I want in this interaction? And I'm going to probably have to deal with relationships. That's probably going to be part of it. And by the way, in terms of taking care of your body, if you're constantly carrying around anger, you're going to find it right there in your visits to your primary care physician. I mean, one of the most toxic things you can do to your body is suppress anger and carry it around. You're sort of mobilized to run at the same time you're saying put the brakes on. That's not a good combo. And your telomeres will show it. Your epigenetics will show it. Your heart will show it. Your overall health will show it. So I think just orienting towards this issue, and then I would hope that if something I'm saying here that's of interest, it wouldn't be a bad idea to start with the ACT literature, but to then expand it out to include the process-based approaches more generally. And once you're there, there's an exciting thing happening with AI tools and with new forms of individual case conceptualization. If you were a Jack Michael student, you know the idea of functional analysis.
Hmm.
We need to bring that idea back, but now in a really new form of how all these things fit together to produce what we're seeing in the consulting room.
Mm. So awesome. Stephen, the last question I always ask is, if every private practitioner in the world were listening right now, what would you want them to know?
I want them most to know that uh, most of our science is misleading them because it's mostly based on normative categories and not on the particularity that practitioners need to learn. So I'd mostly want to say, learn how to help see in the room and orient people towards learning how to be more open, aware, and actively engaged in a meaningful life. But don't forget their relationships and their body. If you just do that and then explore it, I mean, there's a lot of resources out there for free. Just type in psychological flexibility or start with the ACT work or get on my website. Yes, that would be fine, but there's lots and lots of other voices out there speaking the same kind of tune. And you'll begin to see now when you sit down, you mentioned a Gottman, you'll see it right there. These processes are right inside that work. Or, I was about to say Sue Johnson, but she just passed away. But, the emotion focused or schema, or you name it, internalized family systems, you name it. Those processes are there. So I would say put the person or couple or family you're dealing with in front of you. Allow the normative categories to soften and drift away and start looking at the things that are happening over sequences of time. You'll see it if you see the person repeatedly that are lifting the person up, and sniff out those places where, I'll flip it around, where people become closed off, where people become unaware and have rigid attention with worry and rumination, or people don't know what they really want and can't organize their behavior around those habits, or they forget that relationships are important or doing things that are harming their body. If you can do that, your clients will begin to be your teacher. And I do want to say help is on the way from the scientists. I'm beating the heck out of them, and part of a larger and larger community that enough is enough already with all the DSMization of human suffering, all this medicalization of latent diseases that are never turned into real ones. Instead, it's back to basics of put the person forward. And if I could just say it in a couple sentences, it would be this: every voice matters. If you're not measuring and modeling, you're not listening. And if you're not personalizing, you're not treating. Science is coming on the way to really help you do that in a better and better way. And I'm excited about the future of evidence-based psychology meeting the really heartfelt humanistic yearnings that every clinician has who does this work in a values-based way.
So awesome. If people want to follow your work, if they want to get your books, where should we send them?
Come to my website, stephenchayes.com, and just click on yes, please send it to me, and you'll be on my list about once a month. I don't spam people. It's a one-click opt-out. And if you want to dig into some of what I'm saying here more technologically, there's a place called psychflex.com, Psychflex, that is how I'm trying to put these kinds of tools into the hands of clinicians around the world.
So amazing. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Awesome. Thanks for the great questions, Joe.
I love when we can find unifying principles among things. I've talked about this, as I've interviewed different people on the brain, even just throughout this month. As we did our psychedelic assisted therapy series and looked at how the default mode network of the brain works. And then as we've interviewed people about flow state, and we've interviewed people about other ways that the brain has aha moments. It's interesting when we look at kind of multidisciplines and see similar types of things emerging. And as Stephen talks about this, I can't help but think that he's done that kind of within the field of therapy, and to think through, okay, what are those things that we see as trends? Looking for patterns, identifying those patterns, and then articulating those is one of the top things that, consultants and therapists do when we can help identify how to help our clients, whether that's a business consulting client or whether that's, emotionally focused, someone in our private practices. So I'm excited to see what you're building this year and how you're continuing to grow. Don't forget that our memberships are now open over at practiceofthepractice.com/membership. We have a ton of amazing experts coming in this year to help you in addition to our consultants. Thank you so much to Alma for being our sponsor today. I wish Alma had been around when I had my private practice. I had no idea what I was doing. That's why I didn't take insurance. But if Alma had been there, I would have. And there's no reason that as a clinician, you should be spending hours on paperwork to bill for insurance, or not knowing for sure that you'll get reimbursed for sessions with your clients. If you're interested in seeing clients through insurance but don't want to navigate the process and paperwork on your own, Alma can help. They make it easy to get credentialed with major insurance plans at enhanced reimbursement rates and a guaranteed payment within 2 weeks. Visit helloalma.com/Joe. That's hello, ALMA.com/Joe to get started. Thank you so much for letting me into your ears and into your brain. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. Special thanks to the band Silence is Sexy for that intro music, and this podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the producers, the publishers, or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, or other professional information. If you want a professional, you should find one.